Welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I talk to world-class professionals on what it takes to scale successful businesses. I dive deep asking questions to people who are running unicorn businesses, to raising funds, to buying businesses, mergers and acquisitions, IP and patent law, what is to manage performance management. I mean, the list goes on. The idea really is, how do I create knowledge and learning for you guys listening in? And of course, myself, getting the floor with people who I, in many cases, would never dream to share a room with. Before we jump into the episode, I've got to give a special thank you to our sponsors. Firstly, over at Global Wide Advisors, a leading digital consumer products investment bank focused on optimizing the sales process. An incredible team, always happy to pick up the phone and educate you or anyone about the sales process and what you should really consider, and can obviously help take you to market or even acquire businesses. I ring them for just about everything these days. Us over at Multiply Me, we are the end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines, helping find better talent and onboarding them effectively. And last but not least, Escala, our management consultancy focused on process improvement, where we help build better systems for your business. That's all the ads you're going to get from me, ladies and gentlemen. The rest is all about learning. I hope you really enjoy and get as much out of these sessions as I do, sitting face to face with some of the world-renowned leaders in their respective fields, asking them the tough questions that they're not often asked. All right. Welcome to another episode of Successful Scales. I'm so fortunate today to be sitting down with none other than D8a Youngchild. I said I wasn't going to roll my R, and I did, but such is the case when I'm chatting with Americans every single day. D8a, that's how I should be saying it. Welcome to the show, mate. I told you before, and I'll say it again, I would love it if you introduce yourself, because I will butcher it. I won't do you justice, and you have a particularly impressive background, and you're working on some very, very exciting things. So over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Yoni. Yeah, so D8a Youngchild, I'm currently the CEO of D8a Driven. My path to D8a Driven started with a small tech company that I was running out of my university dorm room in the Seattle, Washington area, where we were delivering groceries to islands in the Puget Sound. That path led me quickly into running it in Seattle. Once we started running it in Seattle, we had no competitors, and then all of a sudden, Amazon decided to be our only competitor to deliver groceries with their launch of Amazon Fresh, their beta program. So quickly, I started to interact with Amazon, and quickly I realized I wanted to learn from within the belly of the beast. So I left my startup, I joined Amazon, ran a few of their key categories that they were underdeveloped in, that they were looking to develop so that they could get more frequent customer visits to Amazon. So those categories were household supplies within HPC. So Amazon sold a lot of books and a lot of DVDs back then, but they really wanted to get people buying things they needed every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, like toilet paper or laundry detergent. So I built those categories out. While doing that, I realized that Amazon was a place that was really focused on scale and automation. And what happened was they left a lot of brands that maybe had value to add to customers in certain spaces. They left them fending for themselves. And so to me, that was where I saw an opening to say, I want to go help the brands that Amazon doesn't have the time for, but have some value proposition that I think they have a right to win in the space. So left Amazon, started an Amazon consulting agency. I ran that for about 5 years. And then, ran into kind of your classical entrepreneurial moment where what got me here wasn't going to get me there. I started to see some limitations as an agency in terms of scale. I saw some challenges around reproducing human intelligence and reproducing human intelligence that was humble enough to scale with changes and be dynamic enough to scale with the algorithmic changes on the Amazon platform. And I was starting to see that Amazon itself wasn't going to be the only platform that consumers were going to be buying from in e-commerce. And so I saw my consulting agency needing to make a pivot. And so that's when I decided to actually go back to Amazon and grab my former boss, who was still there. His name's Samar Parikh. I convinced him to leave Amazon at the time, come join me and help me build out D8a Driven, where we built a tech platform with our first intention was to basically automate everything that we did to serve and run Amazon businesses that a human didn't need to do. So pull data, analyze data, look at data, grab the insights, come up with what needs to be done, so that we could just spend more time on the doing. And now we're at a stage where we've started to recognize that when you take all the work that you do on an Amazon business and you put it inside of a system, you can actually start to monitor the impact of that work because it's in a system, not in many people's heads. And so in that system, we're able to now monitor that, hey, when you go do X on an ASIN, or when you change this ASIN, or you add a variation, or you break a variation, we're able to actually measure the impact. And so now we're getting smarter and smarter, much smarter than we ever were as humans, because now we're basically able to optimize based off of big data. So that's where we are today.
What a scary, scary world we live in, but how fortunate am I that I get to do something like this, where I get to interview guys like you about topics that couldn't be more interesting, and just when you're talking about it, and I see and hear the passion in your voice about what you're working on. Just incredible, mate. I mean, congratulations for getting there. And as a former agency, agency owner, and also agency member, team member for many, many years, more than I care to admit, I definitely see the value proposition in what it would to automate, because, there's so many different aspects of what you're talking about right now that, there is so much, let's call a spade here, just wasted time in combing through that data to present reporting to your clients that maybe they look at, maybe they don't, because ultimately you're coming back and you're going to be delivering the solutions anyway, right? So brilliant, mate, brilliant. So I want to take a few steps back here and just really sort of think about the mindset. There's a lot of people that are going through, all of their individual journeys, myself included. I'm always trying to make good decisions on what, the next 2 and 3 and 5 years look like. And you spent 5 years building an agency, which, to last even a year in an agency, bravo to anyone, to be running one for 5 years, it's... Firstly, like anyone who's an agency owner, anyone who's working at an agency listening in here, you're doing the Lord's work, because you get often clients, and I'm talking specifically about this dynamic. You're talking about the dynamic whereby you're paying the so-called expert in the agency, but you also have access and visibility, and you're coming in and giving your 2 cents, and you don't know what the method is necessarily behind the madness. And granted, we're not going to get it right all the time. I'm putting my agency hat on here, but you deal with a lot of flack, and it's thankless work a lot of the time. I always was quoted for you're only as good as your last delivery. That's what agency life is. So just curious, as you were going down that journey, and while you were thinking through what seems to be a very considered decision, you've gone back to your former boss at Amazon, you've pitched him on a concept, like, you've thought this through. What was that tipping point, or what was the catalyst that made you actually consider, A, this can be automated, and B, this is the way forward?
Yeah, for me, it really came from, so I think there's 2 ways to answer that question. I'll give you the specific way in terms of what happened in the space that changed, but then there's also the entrepreneurial journey way, which I'll start there, which was, when your head's down, just focused on working, serving your clients, focusing on retention, spreading yourself as thin as possible to also go work on acquisition, and training your people so that you don't have any fall off in terms of quality of service and quality of guidance and execution. It spreads you thin. It can be rewarding, but it really spreads you thin as an agency owner and operator. And so for me, I knew that I would always, I think, as most entrepreneurs would say, I knew that I would always work 80 hours for myself in trade of 40 hours a week for somebody else. So that part wasn't challenging for me. What was challenging was, as I started to bring people in, I had a mentor tell me, he said, if you want to scale anything you're doing with humans, you need to bring a human in. He said, what do you say? Hire slow, fire quickly. Bring a human in, put them to work. If they can't accomplish 80% of what you would have done otherwise, like, that's your KPI. And what I found was, humans I was bringing in, whether I was paying them low wages or high wages, a lot of Amazon experience, low amount of Amazon experience, depending on how I was kind of trying to balance the books, I wasn't hitting that 80% mark. And I was like, to me, this was writing on the wall of, holy cow, my mentor who had built many successful businesses is like, hey, this is the metric, no matter what industry you're in. And I saw, like, I didn't admit this, but I saw it in my personal reflections that this wasn't happening. And so for me, it was a writing on the wall of something's going to break here. And so it was through, as an entrepreneur, I journal a lot. I'm constantly in coffee houses, just journaling, writing, reflecting on what's working, what's not working. And as I was starting, this was becoming a recurring theme for me. I started to say, okay, what also is now, I'll tell you the second answer to that question. What is also happening specifically in my industry? A couple things changed over those 5 years. One, I left Amazon. I was an ex-Amazonian helping people with their Amazon business when there wasn't much. It wasn't much of an industry in 2013, 2014, as it is today. It's, in my opinion, still pretty infant today, but it definitely wasn't back then. Well, that changed over those 5 years. 2019, the landscape changed. You had both, one, there were more of me, there were more ex-Amazonians out there offering help. Two, there were groups that had always been working with brands, whether they were agencies or brokers, that are standing up Amazon support groups, Amazon consulting arms of their agencies. And then three, there were a lot of people out there, you know, as happens when a void occurs in an industry, you have a bunch of people step in selling snake oil. And so I had all three dynamics really changing. And so what that meant to me was, let me reflect on how I've seen that transition. One, my sales cycle was elongating. I was finding I was having to spend a lot of time telling people what I was different than their other options. Doing it, you know, in the fight, you know, in the trenches, there to serve my business and what I was trying to grow, but recognizing that was different. That didn't happen before. That was number one. Number two, I realized that the cost to serve was coming down, not because we wanted it to, but simply when demand was increasing, for sure. There's more and more sellers, there's more and more vendors, there's more and more vendors caring about their Amazon business. There's more vendors, but I'm realizing that Vendor Central isn't going to work for them, switching to Seller Central. So demand was surely there and surely increasing, but supply was vastly outpacing demand for the last couple of years, 2017, 18, 19. And so when you have more supply than you do demand, or a higher growth in supply than you do demand, you get a commoditization, right? Now there's many options. And when anything gets commoditized, price gets driven down. And so as an agency owner, I'm seeing that my cost to serve, if I'm being honest, is going up, because I'm finding that I can't it's not very high for myself, because I don't value my time appropriately, as most agency owners can probably relate to. But when I'm hiring others and I'm not getting 80% of me out of them, I'm realizing that my cost to serve, if I really scale this, is probably going up, while at the same time, my ability to receive revenue from the industry I'm trying to serve is likely going down. Everywhere I can look and see is telling me it's going to go down and get more competitive. And so, and by the way, I built my entire business never having a sales force, never running marketing, never going to trade groups, never speaking at events. I was referral only. I left Amazon. A few groups found out I left Amazon, said, can I work with you? They referred me to others, and that was how I built the agency. So on top of all of this, I didn't even have an arm of my business to go deal with this dynamic change. And so to me, this was like, holy cow, writing on the wall, this is a nerve-wracking place to be. I was at the time, courting my fiance, and knew that I wanted to build a family, and, kind of seeing all the pressures that one feels in life combined with, new pressures on the business you're going to use to support a family. And it was just a lot to reflect on. And so it was a combination of those things, specifically from my industry within Amazon, the Amazon space, combined with, I think, the realities of any entrepreneur in any space, that kind of brought me to a head to say, one of two things need to be true. I either need to leave this industry because it's not for me anymore based on the way I want to operate within it, or two, I need to get real about how I would like to operate within this space and go build a team around me so that I can go execute on that new path. So, and I looked that decision in the mirror very seriously. And it's weird to say that there was a moment in time where I thought I wouldn't be helping Amazon sellers anymore. And oh man, to be honest with you, even considered going back into professional snowboarding and like a real entrepreneurial, like face in the mirror moment. But there was this little part of me that said, man, how much of what I do as an agency, if I could just get someone's help me build technology, could technology do for pennies? And it was that was ringing in the back of my head that I just couldn't let go of that idea. And so I pursued it and decided to stop going it alone, bring in a co-founder. I think that's a huge moment in time for any entrepreneur to realize that, 1 plus 1 can equal 10. And it doesn't always equal negative 15, the way entrepreneurs often look at that formula. Anyway, so there we go.
It's wild to me though that people think like, my co-founder Lippy, we're so complementary that it's scary. Neither of us would be even remotely close to where we are if it wasn't for the other, and vice versa. It's just, you have a few really critical relationships, both of us with our fiancés, and your co-founder is critical. And I actually just made a note on the whole co-founder, thing. I was really curious to understand. I mean, you guys work together, right? So you already had that sort of test drive.
He was my boss.
Yeah, so I'm saying
quite a dynamic.
Yeah, quite. Well, how has that shifted now that he's no longer your boss, but you're equal?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Oh man, I would say both of us had some learning and some growing to do to make that transition. And I think, in my opinion, now looking back on it, I think one thing that makes for successful co-founders to move forward together is experiencing something that humbles both of them and inspires both of them. And if that can be one thing, the act of going from a boss-employee relationship in a huge company to this, that happens to be our story. And there's many ways, but the act of being humbled and being inspired at the same time by the same thing, I don't know, it fuses a bond that I think is rare, and it's hard to reproduce by just, going to, I don't know, trade groups and finding other smart people and convincing them of your idea. There's a fusion that happens through the act of being humbled and the act of being inspired together. I think that is rare and special.
Do you know, it's funny, just listening to you talk about this, I have never, up until this moment now, and Lippy and I have been co-founders together now for almost 3 years, coming up later this year. Lippy was working with me. I brought him into an Amazon business and he was reporting to me. I built his onboarding plan. So, technically speaking, that was our relationship. And to your point too, it's that journey. It's that journey together. It's so humbling when, there's at the start in particular, there's very few wins and lots of challenges, and as it sort of builds and grows, you go through something. It's a relationship, it's a critical relationship where you spend so much time together. It's impossible not to evolve what that relationship looks like. And I'd say on top of that, for anyone listening, looking for or having a co-founder, I'd say like one of the things that I've learned to be true is communication is so critical. Being constantly on the same page and the same wavelength. The only times that our relationship has wavered has been the times where we've had extended periods of time where we've both had our heads down building, losing sight of what that relationship is. So now, when we noticed that, we built in structures saying, right, like tomorrow's Wednesday, every Thursday, Lippy and I have an offsite where we go for breakfast for 2 hours and there's no agenda. It's not about what are we doing for work? It's what's happening in your life, man. Like if things come up that are work related, great, we'll use the time. But we have our standard weekly one-on-one every Sunday. Our weeks here are Sunday through Thursday. But just to your point, like finding the right co-founder and working and investing in that relationship, it can be 1 + 1 equals, 50.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more. It's well said, Yoni.
I took a bunch of notes before because you sort of went from, and I didn't realize you were a professional snowboarder. That's awesome. And I'm curious to hear about that. Now I feel even worse knowing that you've torn your bicep and your labrum doing a sport that you love, mate. But you're talking about earlier the fact that for someone else, you would work 40 hours and for yourself, you would work 80 hours. When you're in your current state, and this is like just, I guess it's a hot button topic for me.
Yeah.
I, like many entrepreneurs, and it's weird for me to even say that I'm an entrepreneur. I never, I always felt uncomfortable saying it, and I feel like again, it's a lot of firsts for me on this. But recognizing that that's really a passionate thing. I just went to the Entrepreneurial Operating System (EOS) conference
Nice.
in Orlando, and it was just
There's the book
yeah.
right behind you.
There's the book right behind me, all of them.
Yeah.
You can't see traction over there, but it was amazing. Anyway, the point I'm making here is there's a lot to be said of the whole hustle culture. When we were starting building the business, especially when we didn't have so many clients and so many interactions and situations like this where you're trying to grow the business. There would be days where it's 16, 17, 18, I shit you not, 20-hour days that you're working. And I am just, again, knowing what I know now and the EOS life and all of that, like I cannot speak more ill about the notion of the glorification of the hustle culture. And I think that if anyone here is listening in and hearing us talk about sort of the value of a co-founder, anything that relates to building a business, taking time out for yourself and building a consolidated schedule that allows time off. And it's very hard to switch my brain off, and I can guarantee you're a smarter guy than I am, so I can only imagine all the thoughts that are running around in your head. That's, again, you use a tool like journaling, and I'd like to dive in a little bit further into asking you a few questions about that. But coming back to it all, what does your work-life balance look like right now? And you talked about journaling. Like, what sort of practices are you putting in the day-to-day?
Yeah, great question. So I'll start with practices in terms of day to day, and then I'll kind of go into how I manage that transition from not a work-life balance to finding one, and kind of how you tap in and exchange that over time.
And then after that, talk to me about how you made the e-leap from Amazon to entrepreneur. It sounds like you've gone entrepreneur, Amazon, entrepreneur, and that's a particularly interesting journey.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a cornerstone of who I am and what I've built, I think, for sure. So I'll get into that. So, but in terms of practices, I think one thing I would start with, if I got to pass any bit of wisdom on to an entrepreneur out there or an agency owner, is your body is your temple. As much as we call it our mind, and the work that we do coming from our mind, it's really hard for your mind to be sharp if you're not honoring the fact that it lives within this body that all of us have to use to type, use to find energy, use to engage in either these conversations or live conversations. So honoring that your body is your temple, and it'll let you down if you don't serve it over time, I think is a big one. So for me, that includes stretching. I'm a big believer in stretching, but like not living most days without tapping into my body, because it's when you stretch, you engage where you have pain or where you're sore. You find out that, wow, like, holy cow, I've been sitting for 30 days straight and I haven't got out of a chair for most of those days. You feel that when you stretch, in my opinion. You tap into it. So it's an intimate experience with your body to either recognize that you're not honoring the temple that you have to exist in this life, or that you're trying to and you're listening to it. So that's one for me. The other one I would say that is really important to tap into is tapping into that your mind is the kind of deeper, sacred part of that temple. And so for me, tapping into that mind doesn't come through selling clients, doesn't come through talking to industry experts or engaging. It doesn't even come from teaching my employees or helping them or training them. And it surely doesn't come with trying to think of all the grand ideas of how I'm going to, take over the world of e-commerce. Those are all valuable and important and wonderful exercises of my mind, but in my experience, they're not very interactive with my mind. So I need the opportunity to not have distractions, not have expectations, and just sit with a blank page and just write and let come out of my mind what wants to come out of my mind, so that I can reflect on it, see where it lands, sleep on it. So to me, journaling is really important. I try hard to honor that at least multiple times a week. I try hard to do every day. But sometimes, as you're building a company, you have people overseas and you have calls all morning and all night, and things can kind of run away from you. But um, anyways, so stretching, tapping into your body as a temple, and then journaling, tapping into your mind as the core to that temple, I think are really important practices. So that's,
Do you
I don't
do
know,
you
it was
just
one of your questions.
Yeah, for sure. I loaded up on the questions, and then
No worries.
if it wasn't hard enough, I threw another one in after you were already trying to
Yeah.
answer the first two. Great host, but you just free journal, like you're literally just, it's a brain dump. It's sort of a cleanse of the mind and effectively the soul.
Great question. So I've done that. I've done really structured ones. What I found is I feel terrible that I can't call out the company that put together this journal, but it's over there, so I don't want to walk away from my seat here. But I have a journal that basically prompts me. It asks me. It gives me like
The
20
5 minute
different.
journal. No.
Maybe I don't know. I'm not. You're not going to trigger it for me. So I'll describe it. Maybe people will see it. But there's like a bunch of check marks across how are you feeling, and so you can tap it. It prompts you to like say, are you feeling stressed? Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling inspired? And you just honestly check the boxes you're feeling that day, and then it takes you into write 3 intentions that you have for this day, 3 things that you are grateful for this day. And then lastly, it ends with, tell me about your happy hour. Tell me about the moment in time in which today you expect to be as happy, the happiest point of your entire day. And it's through that activity that usually prompts something in me. I do that quickly. Sometimes I take longer on that. Sometimes it just kind of comes out quickly. And I don't judge myself on how many times the same thing I'm grateful for shows up every day, or the same intention that I never accomplished many days past keeps showing up. I reflect on it, but seeing it there triggers for me, and then I usually have about a page of free writing after that.
Yeah, so it's not the 5 minute journal that you're talking about, but I use what's called the 5 minute journal
Mm.
every day, and send me after, and we'll put the link in the show notes if anyone's interested
Oh,
in the
perfect.
journal that you've got. What I wake up to is you have like an inspirational quote, and then it's
Mm.
3 things that would make today great, 3 things that you're grateful for, 1 daily affirmation, so something that you are. It doesn't necessarily need to be true in that moment. It's something that you're potentially building towards, call it an intention, if you will. And then you revisit it at night and you write about 3 things,
Mm.
3 great things that happened today, and 1 thing that would have made today even better. And that for me is a daily practice. I've been doing it for. I mean, again, to your point, you have your boom and your bust. Sometimes I'll
Yeah.
go weeks and weeks and weeks committed to it, and sometimes I will literally go 6 months without using it. And meditation's my other daily practice.
Mm.
And what I'll say is, I know for a fact when I have those two mixed in with my workouts, I'm like untouchable. So it's like
Yeah.
having an accountability partner to keep you honest is probably the one missing thing to getting that down. But that free journaling as well, I have off and on, and just speaking to you now, and I hope anyone listening in has inspired me to go back to doing some of that free journaling and just the brain dump, because yeah, it's invaluable. And also, I don't know if you ever do this, but it's so cool to look back on
Oh yeah.
historic notes. And like, I typically journal about like really big life milestones, or like
Yeah.
if I'm having like particularly like an emotional period or something that's significant, or that's when I'll typically turn to it as an outlet.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm getting caught up on all the habits, and
Yoni, one thing on the free journaling, there's a book out there called Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, where it's a bit autobiographical, about his life and how he has come to intersections in life, and when he saw the green light, he hit the pedal, and he just reflects on like how if you're open to it, you'll see when lights are green, and you'll see when lights are green, but you're acting like they're yellow. And anyways, it's a great book. I think it's a nice metaphor. I think he lays it out quite well. But one of the things he says in that book, depending on who's in your audience here, this can come across in a pretty conceited way, but he basically says the best and most powerful thing you'll ever read in your life is something you wrote. So if you want to be moved, if you want to be changed through the act of reading, you need to write. And it's not to say that the greatest thing ever written is going to come out of your hand and your mind, but likely the most poignant and impactful thing that you'll ever read, and that will change you and motivate you, will be an extension of a reflection of something you wrote. And I deeply agree with it, and I found so much value in like honoring that I have a lot to say to myself, and for me, I have to see it on a piece of paper to read it back to myself.
Dude, I absolutely love that. And yeah, you're spot on. I mean, I think it's just how profound it is when you sort of reflect back, because it's so hard to capture or reflect back on moments in time on how you feel. Like it's effectively like a time capsule where you
Yeah.
look at it at a future state, and you are, every, guys like you and me who are doing the work every day are constantly evolving and constantly shifting and changing and moving through life. So it's just super interesting to see sort of where you were at that point in your life and understanding what you've built upon. I want to change gears for a second, because honestly, I'm just so fascinated by what you guys are building and
Hmm.
what that looks like. And I don't know how much you can or you can't share, but I'm just curious. Like, I think about all the tasks that are performed in an agency. You're talking about, let's talk about an Amazon agency specifically. We're talking about things like PPC management. Can get a grasp for that. There's companies that exist, right, that
Yeah.
look to automate PPC. But when you start talking about things like listing optimization as it relates to identifying the right keywords and then feeding them back in and automating that. So like tools like Helium 10, sure, you can plug it in, pull the data, scrape it, and be able to do it. But automating that, knowing when to change it, I think the most challenging is probably going to be anything that relates to the design and creative. Like, how do you know
Hmm.
to handle it? Like, what level can the platform handle?
Um, what level can it handle? So first thing is we built the platform dynamically. So what I mean by that is it's not fixed by the founder's ideas. So we originally wrote rules for the platform. So what the platform does is it pulls data. After it gets that data, it grabs the insights. It finds out what's most important amongst all these zeros and X's and ones. And it says, and then it grabs that, turns it into insights. So it calls out what's most important. After we know what happened and what drove it, then it starts to predict what we should do about it. And so the more times that we have done that in our past, years in the past, the more times that our system has been able to learn that, you know what, Nader, Samar, Joe, Jack, Craig, they were right about this one, they were wrong about that one. They thought the impact was X, but it was actually way bigger than X, or it didn't matter that much. And so slowly over time, our system gives us the feedback to say, you think you should go do A, you should actually go do X, Y, and Z instead. Because the system is able to work with big brands, small brands, medium brands, and understand that impact, and so that we can get basically smarter and smarter with our guidance and our eventually follow-on execution over time. So that's what the system is doing over all day, every day. What your question was, and I forget the exact words, but like,
I'll
where
come
can it
back to
go?
I'll actually come back to that question in a
Yeah.
second, because I just want that point to sit for a second for anyone listening in here. In what reality has any agency in the history of time been able to have that level of access to data and automate and make
Mm.
decisions predictively into the future? Sure, we're doing, reporting each month and we're pulling the data and we're going through it. But, I think sort of the light bulb moment for me when I understand what we're talking about here is that you're looking at predictive data across many different Amazon seller accounts, many different actions and interactions. The algorithm, I can only imagine, that you're building is clearly learning upon it, and then you've gone ahead and said, well, you've just built the rule-based system. So ultimately, it's limitless in its potential in terms of what the user can perceive and add in and make these, implement these things inside of this rule-based system. Yeah, wow.
Which, exactly. And what gets us really excited is that's the final unlock to say, no matter what Amazon does or doesn't do or changes or actors do or don't do on the platform, our system will respond. We don't need to hire a new account manager. We don't need to hire a new director who just came from Amazon to keep us tip of spear. Our system might even often knows it long before Amazon makes things public, such as A9 seating shifting over to A10 seating. Our system told us many, 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 many months ago interesting. Amazon seems to be rewarding the ASINs that have traffic being driven to it from outside sources a heck of a lot more than we saw in the past. Well, you can pick up on those things if you're using a system that's monitoring impact. You can't pick up on those. You're not going to scalably pick up on those things if you're relying on your humans to talk to each other, share best practices, share learnings. Remember this when it comes 7 months later. But when you put all of that knowledge into a database that can talk to itself and learn and share knowledge across that database, it becomes really powerful. And now when you start to say, wow, customers are actually also shopping on other platforms, this really gets us excited, because if we built our platform to serve Amazon, because that's what we were, Amazon experts, but we were very intentional to try and be as agnostic to Amazon as possible and just build a platform that could self-learn and get smarter over time. And what gets us really exciting is being able to take that same idea and just copy paste it onto Walmart, onto Wayfair, onto Target, onto HomeDepot.com, Shopify, even direct to consumer. So that's kind of where we're excited to go next. But yeah, I think that the power, to your point, leave data driven and me out of it, but the power of data to make decisions in today's world of running businesses is, I mean, it whether people want to admit it or not, it dramatically changed over the last 5 to 10 years, big time.
Yeah,
we haven't
absolutely.
even really scratched the surface on the impact yet.
Yeah, I mean, people are definitely talking about it. It's out there in the ether. It's if you're not paying attention, you're falling asleep at the wheel here in not seeing sort of how seismic the shift has been. And just in general, you talked about the fact that the commoditization of the agency model or selling on Amazon and everything that relates to it is happening. So too comes the professionalization and institutional capital coming in, and what that of course, the cost of running an agency has gone up threefold, because what was once a $40,000-$50,000 PPC manager is a six-figure salaried employee after like having 6 months of experience in some shitty agency that no one's ever heard of, and puts it on the resume. So absolutely. Yeah. Listen, I'm being cognizant of time here, but there's one thing that I've been meaning to dive into. So we'll finish off on this train of thought before I obviously let you talk a little bit about how people can get in touch and how they can obviously render what sounds like, the greatest innovation that I've heard of as it relates to Amazon account management in the history of Amazon account management, if I'm being honest. So you've made the transition, and selfishly, I'm building product internally. So we're looking to digitize a lot of our client engagement experience. I've noticed that I would say another aspect that is a huge, it's a moot point, it's missing, is professional services rendering a high value experience into the ongoing engagement as it relates to client and agency. So in our case, it's around the recruitment process or the onboarding process or, the performance management aspect of it. And, I've got a dev team of about 8, and we're building these things out right now. And, I have a history of building lots of websites, and I'm somewhat familiar with it. It's different when we're talking about SaaS tools, and, the logic is much more complex, and you have to think, almost in playing like 3D wizard's chess. But I guess my question, my question that I'm sort of building up to is, how have you managed that transition from being what was a traditional agency owner running that client dynamic to building technology and having the systems? Like, how has that been for you?
Yeah, I would say the first unlock to being able to make that transition for others that are looking to do it as well is, you have to be able to look in the mirror and humbly say, I need to make this transition, or I want to make this transition, whatever your motivation is in the industry that you play in. So for me, like, I had to do that because I wanted to years in the past. I was like, oh, writing's on the wall. Like, God, man, am I really paying someone to pull all this data down and organize it for me? But it wasn't until I sat with it and said, I need to and I want to make this change. Because once you do that, you open up the tunnel vision that you have on just whatever, driving revenue or whatever you're doing in your agency, and you open it up to accept and be humbled by, it's a challenging transition. you have to think differently. It is 3D wizard chess, like you said, Yoni. You have to hire and motivate a totally different working class, and some engineers are like super dramatic about their way or the highway, and like you have to learn how to engage with that. If you just try and stumble into it and be like, God, gosh darn it, I know I need to. Let me kind of you'll hit roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And so someone once told me, he said, I forget what he said something like, it sounds crazy. He said, make sure you like the smell of shit you're going to shovel, because you're going to shovel shit for the rest of your life. So the only thing you really need to know about is what shit do you enjoy the smell of, because you're shoveling shit no matter what every day. And so it was like this moment of realizing I have to let me waft it in, let me accept the smell, because it's going to be a challenging path to make that transition. So let me be there intellectually, emotionally, so that I'm willing to go that journey, is the first part. And then the second part, I would say, that I think often people miss when they just build product is, at the end of the day, at least for 10 years, our products are interacted by people, not by other technology. And even though they're fed by technology, they're powered by technology, all of it is interaction so that humans can either buy the product, in my case, or that a brand can interact with this product and their employees can be told what to do smartly so they can execute. But it's all about people. And so recognizing whatever your industry is, whether you call it customer success or customer support, whatever it is, but recognizing that even the world's greatest product and the sexiest UI is still there to serve people, and making sure that you don't, at Amazon, they're famous for always sticking an empty chair in the room that has the customer. And every decision needs to also pass, did it serve that person sitting in the room that's not there, the customer? And I think other tech companies and small ones like that are building out startups, I think they can gain a lot of value from that approach, as well as recognizing that at the end of the day, whatever we're building, most likely it has some level of serving humans. And so making sure that we leave room for that is, I think, really important.
Yeah, couldn't have put it better myself, especially putting my Escala process improvement hat on. The way we define what we do is we build, there's no such thing as perfection, but we build great systems. And a great system is the perfect harmony between people, process, and technology. And if even one of those things is not fit into the equation correctly, then it all comes, it all flies off the handle. So yeah, spot on there. Now, before everyone starts going, take my money, well, actually, take my money, how do people connect with Data Driven? How does it work? Specifically, how can someone reach out to you? What does it look like?
Absolutely. Easiest way is to contact us on datadriven.com. It's D8a Driven.com. You can find us there. If you say you're an agency, you can actually get to my Calendly and grab time with me. We can chat.
Fantastic. Well, it'll also be in the show notes. So if you're listening, you'll be able to get access there. And Nada, mate, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. Thanks so much for taking the time. Really, really just enjoyed hearing everything that you had to share before the call, now. And mate, I am so excited to watch the journey.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate the time.